little teaser before Chapter 1 begins when someone reaches out their hand, asking why she became a girlfriend for him. Essentially, he was broke. No education, no talent as a worthless piece of donkey crap. Just him being like that made her such a happy person. If only manga fantasies were real, then I wouldn't be single. Our main character arrives late to his meetup by a whole hour because his alarm didn't work for him at all. For a failure like him, he was sorry for spoiling their long-awaited date for Hizumi. She was looking at Shinba, not bothered at all. She began questioning his sleep right before their date. Even after 20, and his preparation, he still couldn't wake up on time. She went up to his ear telling him because he was a jobless, useless individual, it was irrelevant either way. He was in fear and started to apologize. He was out of breath, asking for forgiveness. She looked at him pitifully, then grabbed his arm, telling them they were going. He didn't expect this outcome and didn't know if she forgave him or not. Secretly, she was falling for such a clumsy donkey like him. She was Hizumi, otherwise known as our protagonist's girlfriend. They were at the cinema because of Shinba's request to see a specific movie. He started to add glazing to the movie and told her he would explain what happens. During the movie, she was drinking and then took a quick peek to her right. He was unconsciously moving the popcorn while sleeping. She got up to put the popcorn in an appropriate spot. She was looking at Shinba with such a loving aura. After the movie, they headed to a restaurant. He apologized for sleeping through the movie even though he recommended it. She told him it was enough for him to apologize, but he apologized again. Her look was, "Why am I dating him?" She was actually quite satisfied, and he was shocked to learn that. Movie was amusing, and she was able to see something that was even more interesting than the movie. Just what could it be, he asked. A secret it became that only she knows. Her attraction grew, telling him it was his penalty for sleeping. He gave up asking and wondered what it was. Their food finally arrived, and it did look good. During their eating time, Shinba was just talking non-stop about the movie. We could crown him king of yapping, but Hizumi stopped him. The queen of yapping arrived, and she started to nitpick everything he was saying, adding questions too. He was overwhelmed and apologized again. She laughed at him, saying, comparing him to a toy. He realized all he did on his date was non-stop failures. He started to tear up, asking himself why he was so useless. Well, she was just looking at him and apologized for saying such hurtful words. She knew he was trying his best, but just got heated talking about his favorite things, and she was fine with the way he ate. He couldn't comprehend what she was thinking, nothing at all, and wanted to find a glimpse of expression. He forgot his wallet when paying for his food, and she would pay for him with her usual composed demeanor. Outside, he was going to pay her back. But just like every other time, her eyes were cold and could see through all about him. She alerted his attention right to her. The dinner she just had was so-called the most delicious one she had in a while. Her unpredictable smile, like other times, appeared. At the bus station, he apologized once again for being a useless person and started to ramble. Well, she returned the favor by telling him about repeating his mistakes and seeking forgiveness. As a newborn puppy, there wouldn't be anyone happy to be with them. He wasn't happy with himself and assumed she would break up with useless. He recognized his mistakes and tried to make Hizumi happy. He bowed down, asking not yet. He was anticipating the breakup, but instead, she was laughing at his amusing face and had lots of fun that day. She didn't mind anything at all and was sorry for making him anxious. Her aura changed and she asked for forgiveness because she likes him. He also liked her, but when he said it, the bus made a loud noise that suppressed his sayings. She left, saying she'll see him on a later date. He was wiping his tears, wondering why she likes a useless donkey like him. Well, currently he likes Hizumi and wants to see her again, wanting to be a suitable person for her bit by bit. On the bus, she was looking at the photo of him. His tears fueled her, and she called him such a useless person. Him being useless really fueled her because she was happy, maybe not in the normal way. Sometime later, she asked about his condition because of his cold. Such bad luck for him because he got infected when their trip was going to begin. He couldn't do anything, and he just wanted him to be in pain and would visit later. Right now, Shinba was a dormant donkey unable to do anything, and this made her a bit too happy. Hizumi visited our boy, and he apologized once again because she had to come over. She noticed his condition wasn't the best because he had enough water on his body to feed a remote village. She offered solutions to his issues because she anticipated he wouldn't have anything to help himself. It was her first time at his place, and well, it wasn't a great representation of a neat and tidy person. Quite terrific there, and he couldn't argue. Rotten, broken things that were all hidden away, averting his eyes from things he didn't want to see. Sounded just like his life, she said. He apologized, and it was just he was so busy that he never decided to ever clean up himself. She pushed him aside, telling him to go rest because she was taking over. Because she was only here for a day, a few portions of digestible food was going to be given to him. She didn't want her cooking to rot, and I'm so mesmerized by how she looks. Anyways, he said absolutely, even though he wanted to graduate from the useless club instead. He caused trouble. Well, she was keeping track of her cooking and the timers. Her gaze was stolen by something on the table. It was a yearbook from Shinba's high school. He allowed her to take a look. He didn't change at all, even though it was 2 years ago. It was his mentality that only changed. His sob story began, and well, let's just say he wasn't the most active person in his whole life. He laughed it off, saying he became a real, proper, useless donkey. Her eyes changed and started to insult the way he lived. Her timer went off and she brought the food. It was because of how he is now that she was able to meet him. The food was right in front of him with Metal Man logos splattered all over them. He said it was delicious, and it was like a mom watching their son. His heart started to race with him, asking what her student days were like. Instead, she asked him to guess how her student days were like. She wanted him to imagine what kind of girl she was back then. He began imagining where Hizumi kept giving him daily after-school lessons. She told him he can't score well on tests, lose prettiness, and forgotten assignments, and how messy he was. She sat on his table, saying from now on she would go to his room to educate him until he falls asleep. Truly a dream of wisdom and education. From the bottom of the barrel to the skies, she would teach him everything. His face turned red, and she wondered what thoughts were going on. She laughed, saying how strange he was. At night he fell asleep, and his dreams weren't that pleasant. Firstly, a bunch of boys were laughing off how filthy Shinba was, but all he could do is apologize. Once again, his boss was yelling at him of how clumsy he was, and he apologized. The demands for others were too much, and that is why they believed he was useless. He woke up breathing heavily, and this caused Hizumi to say, "Oh, you woke up." He was shocked by what she was doing, and it wasn't anything special. She was just thinking he looked like had a bad fever, was lonely while having a nightmare. He would die alone. She preferred him to die while she was looking at him, and many more. He barely could say a word but managed to say, "Don't say such scary things." She was just joking. He was worried of the smell of sweat, and he shuffled around when he slept. It was fine because of her cushion, and he's got a cold, so sweat is the norm. Rather than an immaculate room, her ease was more in a dirtier place. He was starting to feel real affection, but she cut it off by saying, his room, though, needs some renovation. It was fine because she disinfected her spot and placed her own bath towel. How well prepared. In the morning, it was lucky his fever came down. It was a shame for her first time be a nurse in order to retrieve his health back. She put on her coat and decided to go back to work, but wait a moment. Hizumi looks like a particular pink-haired girl who likes to manipulate people. Anyways, he thanked her and wanted her to take care. She asked if he was feeling lonely. If he were to not rest up and his fever returned, perhaps she would have to stay the night again. Now if I was him, I would be faking my fevers. She patted his head, telling him it's up to Shinba how he wanted his day, supposing even if he was a useless person. She waved goodbye, trusting that he'll make the right situation. Later, he hid in his blanket with many, many worries. I mean, this guy. How does he have a girlfriend? On the train, she was looking straight at her phone. He apologized for resting up, but she texted that it was the right choice. Too bad, she said. The next day, she was called about the game center. She doesn't play them often, but doesn't hate playing games. After her call, she called him a motor mouth. With such enthusiasm, Shinba called out her name. How curious of him to get there earlier than him. Since he invited her, he didn't think it was appropriate to be late. It took him 3 alarm clocks to get to where he was not 3 alarms, but 3 clocks. He introduced the game center. His insight was crazy and knew every corridor of the place. She didn't seem too impressed. He knows that usually she just nurses him, but today he wanted to show his cool side. Recognition is his want, and that would help to graduate from being a useless donkey. He went to the game music master and started to hit buttons in such a fancy way. Hizumi was bewildered, and he managed to get a triple S full combo. He was like a little boy that was happy to achieve something. It was the hardest song to get a perfect score on. She clapped saying it was, and he was good at games, but then she darkened. She asked if he only invited her to flex his skills, letting his girlfriend stand behind just watching like a NPC. His realization came right into his brain, and of course, he didn't mean to do that. She celebrated happily knowing that and looked for 2-player games. They were playing a zombie game, and she was hard carrying him around with 30 kills. They were playing a fighting game, and before he could perform a move, Hizumi knocked his character to the floor. He asked why he couldn't connect his killer move, and she gave him an idea of why. He asked for one more time, and she agreed to it. Let's just say nothing changed, like you not having a girlfriend. Right to the punching game, he had an impressive score of 6,000 at the cost of his hand throbbing. She punched the target and got a score that doubled his. She asked if he was still working now, how many kilos he would have gotten. The small child he was ran to the crane game with stuffed animals. What a cute plushie, she said. He started to analyze the machine in depth, explaining the long strategy. He envisioned she would be kissing his toes if he gave her a plushie from it. He tried, but ultimately failed, and when she did, she managed to get it. A cool human, he said, but she didn't know what that was. Later they played more games, and let's say he wasn't the best at them. He was counting the games that they have played, and she was looking at him with such loving affection. During dining time, he was gloomy and unable to show off his skills. She called him kind before reaching into her bag. Before she pulls out the surprise, she said he matched her level of skill because of how good of a person he was. She brought out the plush from the claw machine and called him manly. Him being called manly is a blessing. He laughed, saying she saw right through him. The one she had eyes that weren't in good condition, and if they were to ask the employees to get a new one, they would get a new one. But she didn't care. She liked this one. When there are the same pretty ones with the same design, it is bland. And she could fix up the broken spot. I wish she would fix me. Sewing was her hobby because fixing things was enjoyable. She couldn't match Shinba's enthusiasm with games. She started to point out there were many different forms of love. It was mainly about the love you pour into something that adds value. That's the love she thinks is the meaning. Whether you are the best or produce 0 results, as long as you feel value, it is okay. He thought of her smile and said, I guess so. It was time for them to head back because her flowers were calling her. He was disappointed at being unable to show good spots to her. But his attention was stolen by romance accessories for 200 yen. What a great deal. She apologized for keeping him waiting, but he had a trick up his sleeve to show her. He pulled a ring from up the machine's holes. She looked at the ring, disgusted by it, then turned around and saw the machine. Her brain knew this guy was cheaping out on him, and she might as well date someone else. This donkey was anxious waiting, and because she liked the plushie from earlier, his assumption was she would be happy with it. Unfortunately, such a cheap object made her say he was after cheap romance, or he believed it would make her happy. What a fool at his age. He apologized once again. He was upset with getting such a sorry-looking ring. She tucked it in her sleeve and didn't hate it, but let us assume she did. Well, she wouldn't ever wear that boring ring. She left to the bus saying her goodbyes. In the end, all his efforts weren't there. He wonders if he'll ever be a good boyfriend and if she would leave him. This made him tear up, but such a big man like him shook off his tears. He would eventually, maybe, graduate from being a useless person. The proof would be when he presents a real ring right in front of Hizumi. He would have to search for a part-time job in order to save enough funds for a ring. Oh. At home, Hizumi was shockingly putting a 200 yen ring on her finger. She obviously wouldn't wear it outside. She stared at it with unknown thoughts and started working on her remote job. She was typing away while wearing the shabby ring.